although there are differences between you, the embryo, and you, the adult, those differences are not morally relevant in a way that would justify intentionally killing you back then as an embryo.
Okay, if you're going to say the unborn is not a human person, at what point do they become a human person? At what point do they become valuable? Is it some magical thing that happens when they come out the birth canal? Is it some other moment? So like walk people through the SLED argument that you mentioned earlier, because I think that helps to begin to break down that issue.
Well, the purpose of the SLED argument is to show that although there are differences between you, the embryo, and you, the adult, those differences are not morally relevant in a way that would justify intentionally killing you back then as an embryo. So there's a difference of size. There's your S in the SLED acronym. You were smaller as an embryo, but since when does body size determine value? Shaquille O'Neal, the former Los Angeles Lakers basketball star, is a foot taller than nearly everyone hearing this broadcast right now. But it doesn't follow that he's more human and valuable simply because he's bigger. Body size doesn't bestow value. L, that stands for level of development. Sure, you were less developed as an embryo. And again, our response here should be, so why does that matter? And if I could just pause for a moment, forgive me for preaching. Too often, pro-lifers and pro-life Christians in particular allow our opponents to make claims that we leave unchallenged. If I claim that body size or level of development is what gives me value, I have the burden of proof, not you, the listener. So we are always within our epistemic rights to say, well, why does having body size or why does having a certain level of development suddenly transfer me from being a non-human, non-person we can intentionally kill to a valuable human being that can't be killed? They've got to give an argument for why those differences matter. And this SLED acronym shows that they don't matter. So body size doesn't determine value. Level of development, sure, you were less developed as an embryo, but again, so what? 2-year-old girls don't have a reproductive system that's developed, but we don't think we can intentionally kill them simply because their development isn't finished yet. By the way, development continues long after birth. I speak to teenage audiences all the time, high school students, and I remind them that they are less developed than their parents. They are less developed than their parents physically, and they're less developed than their parents intellectually, which of course comes as a complete shock to many of them. But the reality is you don't reach your intellectual peak till your mid-40s. Body development doesn't bestow value. E stands for environment. Where you are doesn't determine what you are. How does a journey of 7 inches down the birth canal suddenly transform you from non-human, non-valuable thing that can be killed to a valuable human being that can't be? You've got to argue for how a change in location makes a difference. Of course, that leads to the next thing. People say, well, the unborn are too dependent. So D stands for degree of dependency. Yes, the unborn are dependent, but simply pointing that out isn't a justification for killing them. You have to go a step further and argue why dependency on another human being means you can be intentionally killed. There are conjoined twins. For example, there's a set of conjoined twins. I can't remember their names. I'm going to have to think about them. They're known as the Henschel twins, and I think they're known as Abigail and Brittany. And they are joined literally at the hip. And they are now in their early 30s. The press has followed them through 3.5 decades. And you look at these girls, you see one set of legs, 2 body trunks going up from the hips, and then 2 shoulders, 2 heads. Does it follow that neither one of those girls has a right to life because they depend on each other's bodily systems to survive? In other words, size, level of development, environment, meaning where we're located, and degree of dependency are not good reasons for saying we could kill you then, but not now. And what typically happens is people just invent arbitrary lines, magical moments, like Joe Rogan pointed out, that suddenly bestow personhood. But we should always ask, why is that level of development necessary and decisive? Why is it value-giving? They need to argue for it, not merely assert it. And we can always then press back and say, oh, you say it's consciousness that matters? what do you mean by consciousness? Do you mean actual consciousness? Because that rules you out when you're sleeping. Or do you mean having an immediately exercisable capacity for it, which would mean you're safe when you're sleeping, but not when you're in anesthesia having surgery? Or do you mean merely having a natural capacity for consciousness? Well, that would protect you while you're sleeping. It would protect you while you're having surgery. But guess who else it would protect? The unborn, because even without immediately being able to exercise consciousness, they do have the natural capacity for it in virtue of the kind of thing they are. So these are why these arguments that are based on magical moments ultimately fail. They can't tell us why that particular threshold has meaning.